The American College of Radiology,
Focused, forward.
together.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Parenting and Radiology series. I'm Malucci, and today we're going to be tackling a really important topic, strategies for communicating with your training program about childbearing, whether that's pregnancy or adoption or IVF. I am so honored to be joined by two incredible radiologists who have navigated these conversations themselves, Dr. Anna French and Dr. Sandra Abi-Fadel. Thank you both so much for being here, and let's jump right in. All right, so could you both just start by introducing yourselves and briefly just share a little bit about your journey to medicine and your journey to radiology, and at what point in your training did you have children?
Sure. So my name is Anna French, and I just finished my fellowship at Yale this past month. But I would say my journey to radiology started 10, 15 years ago. So my dad was a radiologist, so I had that exposure in my home growing up and kind of always knew I wanted to go down that path. I ended up going to medical school at Brown University in Rhode Island, where I grew up. And then I moved to Connecticut, where my husband's from. And I did my intern year in Connecticut and then my radiology residency at Yale. I liked it so much there. I ended up kind of making this area my home, and I stayed on there for breast imaging fellowship, which is what I just completed. And then in about a week, I'll be starting my new job at a private practice in the area, doing mostly breast imaging, but some general radiology as well. And then I had both of my children during my training. So my first son was born at the very end of my second year, kind of beginning of my third year during residency. And then my second son was born just this past year during my fellowship. So I had experience telling both my residency program director and my fellowship director about the pregnancy and kind of figuring out my maternity leave with them.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. French. Dr. Abi-Fadel, how about you?
Hi. My name is Sandra Abi-Fadel. Um, I am a neuroradiologist currently, faculty at Yale School of Medicine, and I'm also serve as the Associate Program Director for the Neuroradiology Fellowship at Yale New Haven Hospital. My medical journey started in Beirut, Lebanon, where I completed my medical training at the Lebanese University, followed by my radiology residency training at the American University of Beirut. And ever since I did my first elective in radiology, I was so passionate about neuroradiology, and I knew this was the path for me. I joined Yale Neuroradiology Fellowship Program right after, I had my baby at basically 3 months into my faculty position. So after I had finished my fellowship training, 3 months into faculty position start, I had my baby. But I did experience having to communicate with my program director at the time that I was pregnant.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear about your experience. So let's talk about when and how you shared the news with your program. When and how did you communicate your family planning or your pregnancy to your program? Dr. Abi-Fadel, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so 3 months into completing my fellowship year at Yale, I found out I was pregnant. And I was very concerned at the time because there was like a lot coming into play into the situation. I had my fellowship to complete, and I also was considered at the time for an alternate pathway position as a junior faculty at Yale. And I was working towards getting my Connecticut medical license and navigating the complexities of visa requirements. I was also on a visa to complicate things further. And I had many concerns. Initially, I reached out to a junior faculty member who I entrusted. Interestingly, he was also like a father to be at the time. He really supported me and encouraged me to reach out to my program director. And after a lot of thought, a lot of worrying, I did reach out to one program director, and I was very happily surprised He was really very supportive. He focused on me, on my well-being, and wanted me to prioritize my well-being and my child's well-being, my baby, rather than on logistics. And that was very reassuring. At the time, I had a great sense of relief after having communicated with my program director. Given the complexity of my situation, I also had to communicate with my chairman at the time, and I had reached out to graduate medical education member who really empowered me to also come forward to the chairman. It was a very pleasant experience. There's really a lot of support there. So I feel like I worried too much at the time, but it all turned out fine. And I'm blessed to be where I'm at today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abifadel. Dr. French, what about your approach?
Sure. So I think I talked to both my residency program director and fellowship program director around the same time, probably towards the end of first trimester, beginning of second trimester. And I really just started the conversation. So I think it was by email with my residency director, just because I didn't see him as much on a day-to-day basis. And then I think a phone call with my fellowship program director. And I just told them about the pregnancy, kind of when I was due, and really just started the conversation and said I'd love to talk more about, kind of the details surrounding my leave as it gets closer, because I felt like 6 months was a little too far in advance to get into all those details. And of course, I was nervous to talk to both of them about it. The timing, you're just always kind of calculating what do I have coming ahead. And for me, for my first son, it was boards at the end of my third year. And, how am I going to do all of this? And if you take time off, things are kind of condensed into a smaller period of time, whether it's your call, your nights, things like that. So, of course, I had some concerns, and also how are they going to take it? With me taking X amount of time off, is it going to affect my co-residents and things like that? But my program director was also, both of them actually were very supportive, had no concerns. We worry about things, but they've done this and heard this many times before, so it's not new to them. And they were very congratulatory and just all positive sentiments around it. Nothing negative, which was great. So I felt a lot better after that first conversation. And then, like I said, kind of had the second more in-depth conversation later on, closer to about 3 months before my leave. And that's when we really dove into kind of how much time am I going to take, depending on what, the ABR requires you to not go over a certain amount of days off. So I had to take that into consideration, during your residency. And we just kind of went in through more details to make sure everybody was on the same page about how much time I was going to be able to take. And I thought that timing worked out really well.
Yeah, these conversations can definitely be nerve-wracking at times. And both of you have spoken a little bit about the hesitations and the fears that you had going into these conversations. Can you just share more about how you feared that your news would be received by your program directors? And was that kind of impacted by other people's experiences and other people's stories that you had heard? Let's start with Dr. Abifadel.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think to me, there weren't many mothers, at least, in neuroradiology, which is the section that I was in. So I didn't have much experience from other people's feedback, and I had to go through my own experience there. But I think anyone who really knows me knows how much I appreciate Yale as an institution and as a community. So I felt and still feel grateful for like all the opportunities, all the education I got here, all the support. And so I felt an immense sense of guilt because it was like during COVID at the time, right? It was like the COVID-19 peak at that time, and our section was significantly understaffed, and they were really relying on recruiting me to fill a lot of gaps. And this is why I was feeling so guilty. But like after talking to my program director, who also was transitioning into becoming the section chief at the time, I was really like that guilt went away but it's just because I wanted to give back to a section that supported me so much. I felt guilty because I had to take maternity leave 3 months into my faculty position. And yeah, it took a lot of support, it took a lot of conversations, and rethinking, changing my perspective to actually feel good about it eventually.
Yeah, thank you so much for your honesty. Dr. French, what about your fears did you have about how your news might have been received?
Sure, yeah, and I talk to other people too. It is hard to find. There aren't too many who have gone before us, it seems like. So I had like one point person, this one female who had just given birth in residency before me and kind of reached out to her. And she told me not to worry, but of course we still do because we're conscientious and we just feel obligated and to fulfill our duties and be on service. And having to take that time off can be stressful um, for us, and you're just worried about how it's going to affect others. For me, the stakes probably weren't as high. I wanted to be present for my training, but I had kind of 4 years to do it in for residency, so that gives me a bit more wiggle room, which was great. And so, yeah, and I think having the conversation early when I did went a long way to allay some of those fears, and I was really a lot more comfortable during like my second trimester and not so worried about the details and how it would all work out. It's just continuous conversations, when you're on service with them or reaching out by email and discussing it a little bit more, and you talk to more people as you go and hear that other people have done it and it's turned out just fine. So, yeah, I felt pretty reassured after the initial panic.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And both of you have already dived into this a little bit as we've been talking, but once you shared the news, how did your program respond? Was it what you expected? Let's start with Dr. French since you just went.
Sure, yeah. I think for both of my situations with my residency program director and fellowship program director, it was better than expected. And they were both excited, and there were really no concerns on their part. I mean, eventually they needed to know the timing and needed to make sure, like I said, that I wasn't going to go over the amount of days off that you're allowed to take during residency. So just a couple of details like that. But other than that, they wanted to make it happen for me. They wanted to make sure I could take, you know, around 12 weeks off, which is what my institution was going to allow me to take, which was really great, super supportive. And then I had a pretty open relationship with both of them, meaning I could just reach out and email or call with my program director. I would call and text her and talk things through, which made it a lot more comfortable. She would talk to me. She would say, "What do you feel like you need more of before you go on maternity leave?" And she would kind of put me on certain rotations in the schedule to help me. So I was able to maximize my time before I went on leave and then after as well. So super supportive, all good. But that was my experience. And that's what I've heard from others as well.
I'm really glad to hear that. How about you, Dr. Abi Fidel?
Yeah, I have to echo that. It was like the response from the program and even from departmental leadership, because in my situation, I not only had to inform my program, which I was basically part of right at the time for 3 more months, but also the departmental leadership because I'm joining the faculty group. And the response was much, much better than I had expected. I had not expected that amount of support, honestly. I was focused on like making sure I'm there, making sure I'm giving back. I wanted to cover so many shifts to help everyone in the section, but their support was on my well-being and my baby's well-being and our health, right? And they kept reminding me, interestingly, my program director at the time kept reminding me that I need to focus on myself and not on the job all the time. So yeah, I was reminded of the need to balance, right, work and life responsibilities, which is something we forget about sometimes. But the response was honestly amazing. And that's part of why I feel like I belong to the Yale community, right? So the support was there at all points of my career and my personal life, that I feel like it's a family. I feel like I belong here and not just like a place where I go to work.
Wow, no, that's really powerful. I'm glad that you had such a positive experience. And as we come to the end of this episode, I want to give you guys both an opportunity to just give advice to trainees who are preparing to have these conversations in the future. What do you wish you had known going in, and what advice would you give to anybody in the future? Let's start with Dr. Abifadel.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I received a lot of good advice because again, I sought a lot of people's opinion and support. Like one of the advice I'd like to share is to remember it's all in our head sometimes, right? So changing our perspective and embracing parenthood, like it's a blessing to be able to have a kid no matter what, right? What is the way, whether we are bearing the kid, whether we're adopting, it's a blessing. And we need to have the time, the opportunity to celebrate it without worrying and without having that sense of guilt. So just enjoying it would be my number one advice. I think number two would be remember that the institutions, right, that we are working for, that we are training at, have been through this like many, many times before. So it's not as bad as we imagine it to be. And most of the times, if not all the times, they are prepared to hear these news. Like if they are if they are recruiting a woman of reproductive age, that comes with the contract, right, of expecting people to grow their families during training or during their positions and job positions. Yeah.
That's so true. Thanks so much for sharing. Dr. French, how about you?
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And I think I would also say my main advice would be communication. So early and probably continuous communication along the way. I think it's going to go better than you think it's going to go, and they're going to be more supportive than you can probably imagine. So that helps a lot. And then not so much in terms of telling your program director, but other advice would be to just enjoy your time on leave. I had someone ask me if they should be studying or doing clinical work on their leave, and I think while a lot of us would be tempted to do that, I would say no, just focus on time with your family. Your program director is supporting that or whoever it is. And so you have that right to just take that time with your family.
Thanks so much for sharing, and thank you both so much for your honesty and your wisdom during this episode. These conversations are so powerful because they remind trainees that they are not alone, and they give departments insight into how to better support their trainees. So I know that your stories and your words of wisdom will encourage and guide so many others who are navigating this journey. Thank you so much again for joining me, and we will see you next time in Parenting and Radiology.